Welcome back, and now we're going to pass to the first work of Hesiod, the one called Theogony. That's at the end of chapter 3 in English translation. Remember that for all translations, in addition to the ones in the book, you can, of course, purchase other book translations of them, or you can go to the Perseus database, the website for which is listed on the syllabus. And you can find the alternative English translations there for each of the works. Okay, so now we're going to go through Theogony. So I hope that you found Theogony okay to go through. I realize that there were lists and lists and lists and lists of names to go through. But luckily, the basic concept behind Theogony is relatively simple. And what it's going through is an overview of the creation of the cosmos as Hesiod understands it, and then the depiction of the different generations of the earliest Greek gods in order to explain how we end up with the Olympian gods that became the current pantheon for the Greek world for most of their period, and even influential upon Roman times. Please make sure you do understand this work as well as all the ancient Greek works. Remember that the ancient Greek works, the ones in translation, are the ones that will provide the passages that you will need to identify correctly on both your midterm and final exams in the closed book parts of that. So you've already seen that reference to that in the prior video on exams. So each of these ancient Greek works you have to understand in reasonably good shape, so that when you're given a passage from one of these works, you'll be able to remember which one it is and identify its title and author, and then be able to give its plot. So pay attention a lot to these ancient Greek works as you read them to ensure you understand them. And of course, feel free to email me or text or call me if you need any help with the ancient Greek works. Okay, so let's begin with Theogony. As I say, conceptually, the plot of the Theogony is quite simple. It's just that you have to get through all these various names in order to be able to get through. I might suggest that you pause your video and get out your Harris-Platzner textbook and go to the page in which you can find Theogony. So please pause your video, and in your Harris-Platzner textbook, please open to page, in chapter 3, page 88 of the textbook. Please pause your video and open to page 88. Okay, you have that? All right, now, as you can see, the Theogony begins, as we talked about in the last video, with the invocation of the Muses, the description of Hesiod's own personal connection with the Muses, the fact that they're localized at Mount Helicon, the inspiration that Hesiod receives from the Muses, the goddesses of poetry, to begin composing epic poetry. So from there, we get the description of the world itself. As you see, it starts with chaos, which is basically this yawning gulf. The word chaos from Greek comes from the verb kaino, C-H-A-I-N-O, kaino, which means to yawn or to gape, basically. So chaos is this huge yawning void, essentially, out in the world. And then gradually it begins to get populated with the new gods, darkness and night. And you notice that Eros, love, shows up very early. And Eros is the key god that begins to allow for sexual intercourse between different beings. You notice that obviously up to this point the beings are being given birth to hermaphroditically, one at a time, parthenogenically. But now with the arrival of Eros, we have a god who allows for two different beings to come together and produce more offspring. So that's going to allow population to increase manifold times more quickly than had been the case previously. But it's also interesting to see Eros show up here, because you may be familiar with the figure Cupid from Roman mythology as being the son of Venus. And in fact, Eros, Venus is the love goddess, Eros is also depicted in the ancient Greek world as well as the son of Aphrodite, the love goddess. Now, you have to obviously understand that inconsistencies in mythology happen all the time. And for that purpose, by the way, make sure you're paying attention to your Apollodorus, your library of Greek mythology, because he will give you a lot of those alternative explanations and mythological traditions. So you should please pay attention to those, because that demonstrates to you how the different myths can have various versions. And we tend to have specific versions that we remember best of these myths, but we should always be aware that there were, in fact, many other traditions around, and the Apollodorus is for us, quite fortunate, because it does show us what those are. Okay, so here's Eros showing up even before the creation of Aphrodite. Now, the idea of having Eros as this carnal early god, as opposed to Eros derived from the more celestial Aphrodite, is actually a concept that comes up in a later work, a philosophical work by Plato called Symposium. In this one, we have a group of philosophers and the comic playwright Aristophanes, some other writers, and also the famous philosopher Socrates, who all gather together for a dinner party. And they spend their time at the party, each giving a speech about love, Eros, describing in a declamation what kind of characteristics that particular speech giver finds noteworthy about love. One of the orators describes how there's actually two forms of love, and in a way there's also two forms of Aphrodite. One is love that is purely flesh-like. It's carnal and lustful, and has one being desiring the other being only for the physical intercourse, just the raw emotion. And then the other love is the celestial one, that is supposed to be desiring the person for who the person really is, for his or her higher qualities. And so the celestial or divine form of love is elevated outside of earthly desires, and is really the ability of the mind to transcend its emotional carnal being to desire something much more fulfilling and uplifting. And so that would be the Eros that's derived from Venus or Aphrodite, depending on whether you're looking at the Roman or the Greek version. So that would be one explanation for how you end up with these two forms of Eros. But the other point here is that Eros is the god that enables the type of intercourse that allows, again, for the much more rapid population of this new cosmos that's coming into existence. Okay, so after Eros, we continue on with further Genesis. We get Gaia, Earth, and we get Uranus, Sky. And we get, even though they in fact are brother and sister, they end up in an incestuous relationship together. But it does not work out well, because they give birth to the Titans. Now, the word Titan comes from a Greek root that suggests monstrosity in size in a bad sense. It's ironic, but the word Titanic that we associate with the sunken liner is actually a negative word in connotation. It means big in a massive, grotesque sense. So in this case, the Titans are these big monsters, and then besides Titans, there's also the Cyclops, and there's the 100-handed beings, the Kekadonkeres, and so forth, and all of those beings get swallowed up. Uranus is so upset by all these monsters that he just buries them back in Gaia. And so, after Gaia has all of these beings rejected and stuffed back into herself, she finally concocts with her youngest son, Kronos, the Titan, to basically put Uranus out of court. And so Kronos hides one night while Uranus approaches Gaia and castrates him with a sickle, jumping out upon him and ambushing him, basically. Our first act of trickery in the ancient Greek world. And the Greeks did not appreciate trickery very much, so there's already here a very severe negative connotation, and it's not accidental that Hesiod puts it like that, as we'll see more with Works and Days. All right, so castration. So the genitalia fall to earth. There are drops of blood that produce the giants, and when the genitalia fall to earth, they fall into the sea near the island of Cyprus, and they generate foam. And from the foam comes the goddess Aphrodite, whose name includes the word from Greek meaning foam. And so again, you can see the carnal Eros and the carnal Aphrodite, who are distinct from the Aphrodite, who is considered to be one of the many daughters of Zeus, and Eros, who is considered to be the son of Aphrodite. So she is born as well. So eventually, with the dispatching of Uranus, the Titans now take control, and now Kronos has sex with his sister Rhea, R-H-E-A, and they give birth to a bunch of children. They give birth to the 6 elder Olympians, the ones that will become the Olympians. And once again, Kronos, just like Uranus, rejects those children, and he, in fact, ends up swallowing them. Finally, however, Rhea feeds Kronos a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes and spirits Zeus off to the island of Crete for him to be raised in secret. And that's, of course, a common theme in heroic myths that you'll see in Dowden, the idea of the hero who will save the day being essentially orphaned from his parents and then having to be hidden away some way in order to be able to dispatch the villain, who's often a family member, later in life. Okay, so Zeus is saved from being swallowed, but the other first generation Olympians are swallowed up by Kronos. Eventually, Rhea feeds Kronos some type of an emetic, and Kronos ends up spewing forth all of the swallowed children, and that's how we end up with the Olympians, who then attempt to assert control over Mount Olympus. However, the Titans rebel against this, and there is a huge battle, the Titanomachy it's called, between the Olympians and the Titans. Eventually, the Olympians do manage to defeat the Titans, and they are punished by having Prometheus, although this comes from something else, but Prometheus is dispatched to Mount Caucasus, where he's pinned up by shackles onto the mountain, although there's a different reason for that we've seen in Works and Days. And Mount Atlas becomes the the Atlas Mountains in Algeria today, North Africa, and that's because he is assigned to hold up the sky on his shoulders, and he is assigned to do this in Africa. Eventually, however, Perseus, the hero with the head of Medusa that turns people to stone, comes along and shows him the head of Medusa, and he ends up being petrified, and so that's what produces the Atlas Mountains that apparently balance on themselves the sky. So that's how Atlas is punished. All the other Titans are sent down into Tartarus, which is the deepest portion of the underworld, and it's where infernal punishments occur. And as described to you in your book, Tartarus is supposed to be as far down beneath the surface of Earth as Mount Olympus is up to the sky. And so that's how we end up with the Olympians. Now, the Olympians themselves will be discussed more fully in a later chapter, chapter 6. But for right now, it's worthwhile seeing how we have the Olympians coming into being, and various other generational beings coming from them. I want to point out one last thing that is a little bit of foreshadowing for what's going to come up in Works and Days. Please pause your video for a second in your textbook, and please turn to page 93 in your textbook. Pause your video and turn in your Harris-Platzner textbook to 93. Okay, are you there? All right, now, when you get to the point where it says other early gods, you see a whole list of some of the other gods that are born from night, and you can see all these terrible beings. It's described to you there in the middle of the page. Nemesis, which is the goddess of vengeance and deception and forgetfulness, famine, pains, battles, fights, murders, manslaughters, quarrels, lying words, disputations, lowliness, and so forth. And you wonder, how in the world could anything have survived with all those horrible monsters getting around? Well, in fact, one of the points about that is that these would have been some of the early demonic beings produced in early days, and frequently the demonic beings precede the more civilized, advanced beings that form the part of what would then be modern day civilization. But I also want to point that out too, because these are also some of the evils that would have been trapped inside the infamous box of Pandora that is going to show up here in Works and Days. So take note here of this tradition of these evils that are produced by night and of course night is associated often with a period of evilness or wickedness, and realize that those would have been the evils that were locked up inside that chest, if you want to make consistency between Theogony and Works and Days. Okay, so that's what I have to say for right now about Theogony, so come on right back, and we will turn to the chapter 4 work, the one called Works and Days. We'll see you in the next video.